we're so conditioned by capitalism, by money, by having careers and raising families and having all these responsibilities that we tend to get on the train and not even know where the train is going.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you. You're hearing Shadow of the Season by Screaming Trees, featuring my guest, Barrett Martin on drums. Martin's strong sense of time and unique approaches to orchestration and arrangement earned him a place in several seminal Seattle rock bands, including Skin Yard, Screaming Trees, and Mad Season. After the dissolution of those bands, Barrett worked as a session drummer, playing on film and TV scores, and on albums by artists such as REM, Queens of the Stone Age, and Mark Olson. He also earned a master's degree in ethnomusicology and has traveled the world extensively studying musical traditions. A devout Buddhist, Martin was ordained a Zen monk in 2000. Over the course of the last year, he's released his sixth album as a leader, Transcendence, a book, The Singing Earth, and won a Grammy for producing the best Portuguese language album, Jardim Pomar. And now my conversation with Barrett Martin.
I grew up in the forests of southern Washington, so pretty far out in the sticks, south of Olympia. And it was kind of in the foothills of the Black Hills Forest. And I do remember as a little boy going outside of our house in the middle of the night in the summers, and because we were surrounded by kind of a water system, so you could hear frogs and birds and just the sound of the forest. And that honestly is the first thing I can actually remember doing.
What line of work was your family in?
Totally not music. My dad initially started as a pilot and became a flight instructor. And then one of his students had started an industrial explosives company. And he just liked my dad so much that he hired my dad to, come work for his company. And so then for the rest of my dad's career, he just worked through the company and eventually became the chief operating officer of an international explosives company. But it wasn't military explosives. It was like for mining and road building. And so he worked on the airport in Hong Kong, the one that's out in the harbor.
Wow.
He worked on that project. He worked in Southeast Asia. So,
was your dad in the military? Is that how he learned how to fly?
No, my grandfather had been a pilot in the Naval Reserves. He'd been in World War II, and then after the war, he became a pilot in the Navy Reserves. And he taught my dad how to fly as a private pilot in the 1960s when everybody was learning how to fly.
Did you learn how to fly?
I did. Yeah, I didn't get my pilot's license, but they taught me to fly, and so I was flying when I was 16.
What about your mom? What did she do?
My mom generally was a homemaker, but I grew up on this homestead, so we, like I said, we lived out in the woods, and we grew all of our vegetables, raised chickens and some other animals for, to eat. So that was kind of a full-time job, but she later went back to school and became she was a surgeon's assistant. It was kind of after we had all grown up and finished school.
How many kids were there?
3 of us.
It sounds pretty idyllic.
Well, it was. I mean, when I think about how a lot of kids have to grow up nowadays, I think I was lucky growing up like that, close to the land. But the other side of it is, it was the 1970s, the 1980s. Obviously, it's way before the internet. So at the time, it felt very isolating. So the only connection I had to the outside world, were records that I inherited from my aunt.
The cool aunt.
Yeah, I had the cool rock and roll Aunt Mary, who gave me my first rock records. But I also, prior to that, I got all these old jazz 78s from my grandparents. So that's all I had.
So those would presumably have been mostly big band stuff if it was 78s.
Yeah, it was, typical kind of World War II and post-war. So it was Glenn Miller and Duke Ellington and Count Basie and things like that.
When did you start to develop your own musical taste?
I was one of those kids that started playing drums when I was young, probably, I'm going to say 7 or 8 is when I remember getting a snare drum and starting to play. So I played all through elementary school, junior high, and high school, played in the high school jazz band. And we had a good high school jazz band that played all around the Northwest. Like that was the first touring I ever did. We'd go on these weekend excursions and play a couple gigs from Vancouver, Canada, as far as Portland, Oregon. And so in the beginning, I was really much more into jazz than rock, and that continued through college. I mean, I liked rock and roll, but I wasn't aspiring to be a rock drummer. I just, I liked listening to it, but my practicing and most of the music that I was learning to read was either jazz and then later classical percussion.
Were you listening to stuff that was contemporary at the time in the 70s?
Yes, I grew up in the 70s, but then I was in high school.
Okay, in the 80s.
Like literally 1980 is my first year of high school. So
okay.
The jazz that we played was relatively contemporary. So we played, Herbie Hancock. We played Chick Corea. We
Sure.
played, we still would play the big band stuff. We'd play Count Basie and Duke Ellington and, Miles and Coltrane and stuff like that. But we would also play sort of what you would call the fusion of that era.
Right.
It's funny because our band director was really, he'd been a Marine. He was in the Marine band and he was a trumpet player, so he was very good, very disciplined. And he had us playing very complex charts, considering that we're, 17, 18 years old.
What did he do to pass that discipline down to the students?
He taught in the best way, which is by example. So he would play with us. He would actually play trumpet or flugelhorn. He was very good on both. And so he would show us the actual melodies and he would talk theoretically about what the composer or the band was trying to say when they made the original recording. And we would often listen to the original recording on the turntable and then pull out the chart and, start reading it. So, it was just very, very much by example. And I've always thought that was the best way to teach anyway, You can't really teach it unless you really know it, and you show that you know it by doing it.
Yeah. So what were your ambitions at the time?
When I was in high school, my ambition was to go to, I went to a state college here, Western Washington University, which is just up by the Canadian border. I got into the jazz and classical studies program. So I was a music major, and I just wanted to, continue my understanding of music theory and practice. And, but, to be honest, I didn't think much beyond that. I wasn't thinking that I was going to be, in a professional jazz band. It was just what I loved at the time. And I had a scholarship. So the scholarship, it was a full scholarship, paid my way. And then I dropped out after a couple of years.
Why?
Well, I felt like I'd kind of gotten as far as I could go in that program, which I think is common with a lot of music students. you sort of feel like, well, this is getting repetitive, and you're young and you're antsy and you want to play.
Right.
And the summer, I dropped out after my sophomore year, so I'd gone for 2 full years. And I'd spent the summer in Seattle with my old roommate, because we both got jobs down here for the summer. And I just loved Seattle. I loved the music scene that was happening. And I was only 20, so I wasn't actually old enough to go into bars, but I would use his ID.
So this was what, 86?
It's 86, yeah. So I was 20.
Yeah.
And but I could get away with using his ID, so I could go see shows in the bars. And of course, it was rock and roll, but there was also really cool experimental jazz, it was just a very experimental time in music.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
I always read books, and I always checked out new music, and I can honestly say that I was into world music way before it became, like a popular thing. I actually would seek out African records, and I mean, by that point, everything was starting to get reissued on CDs as well.
Right.
So I just became really interested in world music and indigenous music, and I think it's also because I started to realize that music was a life force.
Right.
And it was not just limited to the music that I had grown up with. It was also all over the world, and it was manifesting in many different ways.
It's also one of the most efficient means to connect you to other cultures.
Yes, yeah.
For me, music kind of started out as taking me out of my suburban bubble that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And then took me out of that scene when I started playing with jazz musicians that were 20, 30 years older than me. Now I'm dealing with people from a different generation and a different background. Then took me to India and other countries, and I'm learning in Brazil, and I'm learning all about different kinds of music, but in doing so, I'm connecting with other people that I wouldn't necessarily have connected with otherwise.
Well, one of the things that started to happen just really organically for me, all the touring that I did, I started, my first professional tour was in 1990. And so I'd already been in Seattle for 3 years at that point. And I'd been playing lots of club gigs, but I finally went on tour in 1990. And I didn't really stop touring until about 1998. And that was between 3 different bands. I was initially in Skin Yard, which was one of the early kind of proto-grunge art rock bands. Then the Screaming Trees, and then Tuatara, which was my first instrumental group. And between those 3 bands, I stayed busy and toured pretty much the Western world, North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and I started doing other trips on my own. So I was invited to Cuba in 1999, and then I was invited to Brazil to work on a record in 2000, and so my kind of rock career just sort of dovetailed into this more world music, but also it was a cultural, musical, and also kind of spiritual wellspring that I started to tap into.
Yeah, I want to talk about spirituality with you.
Sure.
Were you raised in a particular spiritual tradition?
No. I mean, my mom would take us to the local Methodist church every now and then to make sure that we were, had some kind of fear of God, but we were not a religious...
Did you have a fear of God?
No, I always thought God, whatever that is, and I tend to think it's a woman, to be honest with you, because everything I learned later in life was that life comes from the feminine in all aspects, not just women, but like the feminine energy of the universe is where it all comes from. But I had a deep reverence for creation, particularly the natural world. And I think growing up in the Pacific Northwest, where you feel that directly, and the way I grew up, I always loved forests and mountains and animals, and my godmother is a Cherokee medicine woman, and I have a little bit of Cherokee from my grandfather, and so I kind of had this indigenous Native American influence that has been with me since I was very young. And I think because of that, I've just always felt what I would call spiritual and reverent, but not, I never identified with the sort of Judeo-Christian straitjacket, like it's too rigid and doesn't really encompass the totality of this planet.
I think lots of people seek rigidity in their lives.
Well,
maybe out of fear.
Well, most hard decisions like that, people that make very extreme decisions, make those decisions out of fear. Like in a variety of things, not just religion, but
sure,
but everything.
Did you have any sort of existential dread as a child?
No,
I didn't. Were you afraid of mortality? Your own mortality? I think
every young person goes through that at some point. They're like, oh my God. You start to see your relatives die, like when the grandparents start to die. And a couple people I went to high school with died young. And you start to realize, man, life is fragile, it's precious, and it can end at any moment. And that's probably what got me into studying Zen.
Could you talk a little bit about what Zen is? Because we hear it a lot in pop culture.
Yeah.
The Zen of motorcycle repair,
right.
The Zen of shopping,
Right.
But what does it mean to you?
Well, I will say this about my Zen training. I studied with a Japanese Zen master from about 1996, actually to the present. And she... her name is the Reverend Yuko Conniff. She was a medical doctor and then became a Zenist and was trained in Japan.
Is she Japanese American?
She's American, but trained in Japan.
Got it.
And then taught and still teaches at the Detroit Street Zen Center in Los Angeles. So in 1996, I moved to Los Angeles and I was doing a lot of studio session work and that was sort of my day job. And then at night, I would study Zen. And then the Zen became morning and night with studio sessions in between. And then I eventually became ordained as a monk and stayed in the Zendo until about 2001 when I started going back to school. So I had this very intensive spiritual period in my life, about 5 years. But it's still my daily practice. And what I would say Zen is, it's not what people think it is. It's not like you're all chilled out and relaxed. I mean, there is that part of it when you're in deep meditation. But what Zen is about awakening your mind to become as acutely aware of everything as possible. So like right now, as we're having this conversation, I'm keeping my mind as focused on your questions and my responses and trying to be very clear and accurate in what I'm saying. But you apply this mindset to everything you do, whether it's, washing the dishes, the way you dress, the way you cook your food, the way you drive, the way you interact with people, and very particularly in the way that I play drums. And so the way I would apply it to that is that Zen is about keeping your mind completely aware moment to moment to moment, because that's what reality is.
Are moments real?
Yes, the moments are real, but time is not real. Time is an invention of the conceptual mind to keep track of these moments. But the universe is constantly reinventing itself in these moments. And so by keeping your mind on the moments, you become acutely aware of everything you're doing in the way that you play and the way that you express your spirit through, the Zen of drumming.
All right, I'm going to ask you what might sound like a silly question, but how would you define a moment?
I think the deeper you go with the spiritual practice in any of the meditation traditions, Zen is a Buddhist tradition, but there are many traditions that use meditation. I would say a moment just simply becomes whatever your capacity is to understand a moment.
Yes.
It can be a split second or it can be, a sort of extended moment. It's all relative to the experience.
Yeah, because to me, I almost think of it in a different way. Like the flow of time is real, but moments are the product of the conceptual mind.
That's right.
But anyway.
No, you're exactly right, because the conceptual mind is the sort of intellectual mind.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, it's that same mind that wants to analyze and compare jazz to rock. And make little dissections. But the absolute mind, which is the eternal mind of the universe, which each of us has access to, that starts to emerge in your practice. And it's the absolute mind that understands the moments.
So another product of the conceptual mind, on a very simple level, the existence of, say, objects, right? Because if we're breaking it down, there's just a continuum of particles, and you know, you and I are part of the same thing, right? But our mind is evolved to see things as separate for survival purposes, right? But so tell me more about the absolute mind.
Well, the absolute mind is sort of, I guess, what you would call the universal mind. It's the mind of creation that created the universe, that is deeply connected and not even separate from the moments of creation. It's actually merged with it. It's the oneness that you hear about.
Do you believe the universe was created?
You mean as in like a deity created the universe?
Or do you believe that it didn't exist and then it existed, or has it always existed?
I think it's always existed. And the reason why I say that is that I think you start to know this. The more that you meditate and the more that you tap into absolute mind, you start to know things. But it's also interesting how it's parallel to what's being discovered in quantum physics.
Right.
So when you talk with a real Zen master or an indigenous medicine person or a shaman, they'll use the same kind of description of reality as a quantum physicist does. You know, there are these moments that are happening. The mind is merged with reality and is co-creating reality. You know, we're co-creating this conversation right now. We're both part of it. And you're directly participating in the life force that's propelling it. So I just tend to think that it's always been here. It's always going to be here. It's just going to constantly be reinventing itself.
Where does the notion of free will fall in this practice? Because you just mentioned that we're co-creating this conversation, but I could also say that this conversation was bound to happen, and I'm just a product of my environment and my genetics, which is just another product of my environment, really. You know, everything that's happened in my life so far led to this moment. Right.
So yeah, your karma brought you to Seattle, and my karma brought me to Seattle, and we're both drummers, and we're both clearly, you know, intellectually driven to go deep into the mystery of the universe, and so our karma brought us together.
Is karma something that we create on our own, or is it fated to happen?
I think, you know, this is a good question for my wife. My preface here is that my wife is actually a PhD in psychology with an expertise in Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, she taught in the Ivy League for many years, so she can articulate things that I can't. But what I would say about that is that there was a kind of will that we each have, and that will manifests over long arcs of time, you know, lifetimes. That's what I tend to believe. And those lifetimes, you have so many different experiences, and they bring you in certain directions and polarities. And so you come into this world with certain karma, and you also create karma, you know, in each existence. So that's why, and I found this to be true experientially, I should say, also experimentally. But experientially, when I have made certain decisions in my life to do certain things, somehow a window opens, or a door, or a path, or an opportunity, and there it is. But you have to will it, but then you also have to physically act upon it.
Do you ever feel as though you have to grab a karmic sledgehammer and smash an opportunity open from a wall or something?
I found it to be more true that you learn how to say no to things and to say yes to other things. It's not so much smashing through a wall as it is that's like, okay, that could be a cool project, but it's not exactly what I want to do.
Right.
I'm kind of speaking musically at this point.
Right. So now you're learning which particular choices might be most in alignment with your values. And once you're in tune with that, then things tend to work out.
I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, but much more succinctly. I think, when you're young, you say yes to everything because you're young and you're
You need the experience,
and
too.
you need the experience, and you're excited about life, and you just want to see what it is. And then as you go through that process, you start to say, I don't really want to do that, but I'd like to do this. So you start to refine your focus. And then as you get older, I'm now 51, and it's more that I'm kind of
But
deciding.
time isn't real. Just remember that.
Right. My conceptual mind tells me I'm 51, but my soul feels kind of ageless, to be honest with you. But then you start to make decisions about, like, I'd rather do this than that. Like my soul tells me this is more what my alignment is.
I actually am kind of going through a phase like that as well, where I have certain skills, but I'm interested in broadening those, like kind of building on them and taking another step out into something else.
Yeah.
And so part of me is like, well, but now this other skill set that you've built up is becoming lucrative and maybe you should do that too. And the more excited part of me is like, well, why don't you try closing that door for a while and see what happens if you leap out into the wild and trust yourself. But it's difficult to trust yourself.
You know what it is? I bet and forgive me if I put words in your mouth, but I think you trust yourself, but you just don't trust the music industry or maybe, just the time we live in, which is, often frightening and seems dangerous. But I think this is true for every human being, that if you truly do what your heart tells you to do and do what your soul is speaking to you, you will find a deep happiness in the work that you choose, because that's what your soul is telling you to do that.
Can you remember the first time that you were aware that your soul was telling you to pursue music?
Well, I went to college because I knew I wanted a higher education. I just kind of knew, and I didn't come from a super educated family. I think my dad was the first person to even go to college in his family. So he encouraged me to do it, but didn't, push it on me. I just kind of wanted to go to college. I wanted to learn, but I wouldn't say that that's what made me want to be a professional musician. I think it was once I moved to Seattle and I started playing just like little club gigs, not far from where we are. Like most of the shows were right here in downtown Seattle. And I started playing for people that were excited and would, cheer and applaud. That's when I knew I wanted to play for people. It was like I saw the connection of the artist and the performer and the audience, and I saw it as a kind of unity.
I wonder if the sensation that you felt at that time when you were connecting with your bandmates and the instrument and the audience. Is that similar to the sensation when you're meditating?
I would say there's a similarity, because when you're in deep meditation, you do feel connected to the greater universe. When you're playing a show, you feel a deep connection to the people in the audience. But it's kind of a funny thing, and I bet you a lot of musicians have said this to you. You can really feel the audience's energy in small clubs and even to the theater size.
Yeah.
But once you get out on big stages where you're playing, like at festivals where you're playing to 50,000 people, it starts to dissipate. It's like too much,
Yeah, I spoke to Mike Shreve yesterday.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about playing at Woodstock.
Right.
And he said they just all clustered together close on the stage so that they could feel that energy, because it's almost like the audience felt separate at that point.
Right.
And it felt like just another gig until other people started assigning meaning to that event as kind of like an iconic bellwether or something.
Right. I think that, I know Michael Shreve, and I love his drumming, and of course I've seen that video. I think maybe the audience can still feel, obviously they can feel the music coming off the stage, but when you're playing a giant stage that's just open into the abyss, the desire is to get closer to your bandmates so you can still feel that. So the funnest, most energetic and really transcendent shows I've ever played in my life have been in kind of like the theaters, like the big theaters where there's just 1,000, 2,000 people, and they're all right there. You can see their faces in the balconies, and you can see them, and they can see you, and the music is contained, and you're playing a place that's designed to perform music.
When you were playing those club shows here in downtown Seattle, did you have aspirations of blowing up and becoming a big rock band or becoming a rock star? Did you think that was something that was even possible?
I think we all started to think that by about 91. But prior to that, not really. And I'm telling you the truth. Like, I just thought, well, this is going to be fun for a little while here, but
it doesn't seem like there would have been any reason to think otherwise before Nevermind came out in 10 and those records.
Right.
And then the entire music industry came up here and started signing people for a while.
Yeah. Well, I think the funny thing about that too is there were so many great bands that came and were gone before 1991 that never got a chance to even sign a record deal that, were at least as good, if not better, than many of the bands that did get record deals. So there was just sort of a moment in time that happened, and of course, everybody thought, wow, maybe we could actually get a record contract. But to be honest with you, I didn't think of myself as a rock star, and I never really lived my life like that. I always kind of did the opposite. I just found myself playing in rock bands, some of which were successful, and some of which sort of did okay, and a couple that never even made it onto the public consciousness.
Was it a meaningful experience for you in the moment?
Oh, of course, yeah. And I learned such a great deal about life and about the world, because rock and roll allowed me to see the world.
Right.
And I was able to earn enough money that I could do these more exotic trips to Africa and South America and the Amazon and do things that most people just don't do. And so every time I take a trip, even today, my wife and I will say, hey, this is great. Music is allowing us to do this, whatever that may be.
Did you feel like there was something missing in your life before you started studying Zen?
I had a spiritual bent in my life. Like my karma took me in that direction. So it started with Native American ceremonies, to be honest with you. It started with sweat lodges. It started with, just learning the cosmology and the teachings of both Cherokee and Lakota. And then I ended up, doing a couple of sun dances where I worked as a fire tender for the medicine men and medicine women. And that was before I did Zen, and it sort of ran very parallel with it. I did both the Zen and the Native American practices at the same time. And so this all took me up into the mid-2000s when I went back to college and graduate school. And so when I started studying world music and ethnomusicology, which is what my master's degree was in, I was already pretty deep into what I would say is a deeper understanding of indigenous spiritual practices and worldviews. And so it was easy for me to just kind of go into that. And so when I went to Africa and when I went to the Peruvian Amazon, for example, that's where I did my master's field work. I worked with an indigenous tribe that didn't even have a drum. There was no drumming. It was all just singing. They were called the Shipibo, and they're in the upper Peruvian Amazon. And their culture was so musical and so deeply spiritual that just that single event, spending a month with them in the Amazon, that changed me yet again.
Yeah, how can you do that in the most respectful way? Like you're coming in as an outsider into somebody else's culture, right?
Right.
And as much as we can talk about how we're all one and it's great for cultures to be exposed to one another. I mean, how do you do that without becoming like the cliched guy that like has an interest in something and goes and kind of where's the line between respect and intrusion?
I always wait till I'm invited. So invitation is the first thing. I was invited to go work with the Shipibo in the Amazon when I was in graduate school because they specifically wanted someone to come and record their songs and help them make a CD so that they could sell it and have a piece of music that represented their musical cosmology. So I actually had an assignment and I was invited to come to their village, and it changes the whole dynamic, when you're there to help people, not to exploit them or to take advantage of them. And the same thing in Africa. I was invited by a family of drum masters, Wolof drum masters in Senegal. And so I went and I lived with that family for also a month and just, played a lot of rhythms. And actually, one of those young men plays in my jazz group.
The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
What thoughts move through your mind throughout the day?
That's okay. Well,
as somebody who's trying to live moment to moment and be ultra focused, well, do you feel like you're like, I have an undercurrent of thoughts.
Sure.
And I think that's common. I think that's what lots of people get into Buddhist practice, is to kind of control or quiet this thought, this current of thoughts. But do you think about anything in particular when you're on idle time?
Well, one of the things, when they talk about meditation, books on meditation, or when you go take a class on meditation, the first thing they'll tell you is you're going to be surprised at how loud your mind is. As soon as you sit quietly for just 5 or 10 minutes, you'll hear your mind just racing. And so that's the case with most people. And I go through periods like that too. Like right now, I'm producing 3 different albums that are all totally different. And I'm working on another book with my wife. And so we try to divide the day up, like depending on what project we're working on, and just be focused on that for that particular day. But I would say, the predominant things that go through my mind is, how can I do this particular task, whether I'm producing or performing or writing, to the best of my ability? Am I being as conscious and awake of the process as I can be? Am I conveying the right message to the musicians or to the reader of the book? Am I being authentic to myself and to the message I'm trying to put forth? That's sort of in general. But, one thing, I found this to be very true. In the West, we talk about meditation as being Buddhist because that's just the most obvious thing. But when you really go around the world and look at what meditation is, it's everywhere, and it's in places that are not Buddhist.
Sure.
The shamans that I worked with in the Amazon meditated, but they wouldn't say they were Buddhist. They just meditate. Native Americans have a deep meditative practice.
What's the common thread through all those practices that makes it meditation?
The ability to sit still and really observe your own thoughts. Like, observe what's coming into your mind, observe what's coming into your soul. What is your soul telling you? Paying attention to that, and then correcting your life accordingly. Because I think in the West, we're so conditioned by capitalism, by money, by having careers and raising families and having all these responsibilities, that we tend to get on the train and not even know where the train is going. I got on the train, we'll see where it goes. And so people aren't as aware of where their life is going as they could be. And I just think when you look at how powerful meditation is and how much it really benefits people, you don't have to say you're a Buddhist or a shaman or anything. You just meditate.
What exactly do you do when you're meditating?
Well, I meditate with my wife every morning and sometimes in the evening. So once a day minimum, sometimes twice. And just 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes, silent meditation with the eyes open. This is classic Zen meditation. Eyes kind of in a soft gaze, gazing down in front of you, breathing through the nose and just paying attention to your breath and allowing the mind to just relax and settle into non-conceptual absolute mind.
What was the impetus to move to LA?
Well, it was interesting. My sort of Seattle rock career, for whatever
Why are you putting it in air quotes?
Yeah,
it was a career, right?
I think it was a career. It's still somewhat ongoing, although I'm not even in a rock band anymore. I'm actually kind of going back to doing jazz again. But I moved to LA in 1996. I was still playing in the Screaming Trees, but we were kind of winding down. And I got a place in Hollywood. What I wanted to do was just get into recording and producing. It was really just a desire to play more as a studio musician than a quote, rock star. And then that led to going back to graduate school and really going deeper into, well, what is music?
What is music?
I think that it is a evolutionary life force. I really believe that music is a living thing that comes out of all life. Because now we know that animals make songs and communicate. I just read an article that...
Haven't we always known that?
Well, I think indigenous people knew that, but now scientists can officially say, yes, that's true. I just read an article that the bowhead whale under the Arctic ice, they improvise like a jazz musician. When they do their whale songs, they actually improvise and do little variations on their song. But we hear this, with birds, we hear it with all kinds of animals. And I don't know if you've read the work of Bernie Krause, the Great Animal Orchestra, and he talks about all these animals that will use the natural landscape, and they'll use rock formations to create natural reverb and reflection, and will attune their song depending on the environment. But when I look at it just in this lifetime, what it's done to me, how it's changed me as a person, how it's evolved me spiritually and mentally and physically. It really does evolve us as a form of life. And then when you look at real musicology, when you see how music shapes culture and the way that it will protect people, the way that it helps reinforce a cultural belief system or a worldview, it's very much a survival mechanism, which is, that's not a uncommon theory. That's one of the first ethnomusicology theories, is that it's a survival mechanism. Music brought us in, out of the wild, brought us to the fire, got us to communicate, to sing, to, percussion is, one of the first things we did, banging bones.
One of the first forms of communication.
That's right. Yeah, banging bones together, rocks, singing, dancing. It started to create community, and then the community grew, and the community became more sophisticated. The music and the singing and the pantheon of music for that culture becomes more sophisticated as a result of that humanity.
Have you ever felt disconnected from the music that you're making?
I'd be lying if I said no, but there's been times when I played on records that I didn't feel deeply connected, I would never take on a project if I didn't want to be a part of it, but then sometimes you get into the studio and the producer starts to make it into something you didn't think it was, and then you don't feel as connected to it. So I've had that experience.
What about even if you're just sitting and playing on your own and the spirit just doesn't come?
That sometimes happens. I have a drum set set up in the studio of my house, and I try to every day sit down and play. And sometimes nothing really comes. I'm just kind of going through the motions, certain rhythms that I always play to get going. And I try to, break into something new. And sometimes it comes and sometimes it doesn't. But the thing I have learned, and I've read this, when you read the biographies of other artists, not just musicians, but writers, painters, poets, they'll all say the same thing, which is that inspiration doesn't just come to you.
Yeah. It's like fishing. You have to show up.
Yeah, that's right.
Cast the rod, and sometimes it comes, and sometimes it doesn't.
Fishing's a great one. Yeah.
But my question is, do you think that it's something external that's not coming to you? Or do you think that on those days, maybe you're just not as tapped into the universal mind as you could be? Like, what is it?
I think, when I think about sitting behind my drum set, that's the place where I've spent the most time in a what I would call a ceremonial situation. Like the tens of thousands of hours I've sat behind a drum set. That's my altar. That's the temple that I'm most familiar with. And I think sometimes when you show up to the temple, you go through the rituals and you do your prostrations and pour the libations. And you do that because you're honoring the universe for giving you that opportunity. But the universe isn't always ready to give you something back for that. Sometimes it waits a long time. And sometimes it pours out. Mm-hmm. I've gone through dry spells where I didn't feel super creative, but I stayed with the drums.
Sometimes it's difficult for me to know when to leave a situation, like what we were talking about before, closing a door, mm-hmm. and when it's important to stay with it, when it's important to put in more work. When do we know that the seed that we planted just isn't going to grow? And when do we know, okay, well, we have to put in a little bit more work and wait for some more rain?
I would say that the moment that you're disrespected by either, your bandmates or your record label or any kind of situation where you do not feel honored for your effort or your talent, that's when you should begin to question it. And then each person has individual, like, how long do I wait, or what's your limit, or what's your sort of absolute. But when you're younger, you feel like you have your whole life.
Yeah.
And so you're more inclined to stay in situations and see the outcome of it. And to be honest, there's a lot of wisdom that's gained from that. the thing about wisdom is it doesn't come from easy situations.
Right.
People that have been handed things and just seem to generally don't have a lot of wisdom. They got lucky, but they don't necessarily have wisdom. The people that have been through hard situations, both professionally and with people and life, or health problems or career problems, that have really been in the grit, those people have the deepest wisdom. And they're the ones you want to talk to anyway. They're the ones that they can understand life. But that's what I would say, is that you have to define your own boundary.
Do you ever disrespect yourself?
No. I mean, You're
kind to yourself.
Yeah, but I also, I've been around people that were very disrespectful to themselves.
Yes.
Addictions and self-destructive behavior. And I've seen what that can do to people, how it kills their soul. And I saw it very young, very early in my life, and also, professionally in music. And it was very hard to see people destroy themselves like that. In the 5 major rock bands I was in, 3 of the singers passed away, and 1 of the bass players. And a lot of our friends died from drug overdoses and, just self-destructive lifestyles. And so I knew that I wasn't going to go that way. And so I made a decision pretty early on to be healthy and take care of myself.
Was that a decision, or was it a predisposition? I mean, I don't think that people start using heroin because they are trying to kill themselves on a conscious level, right? It's not like, well, I'm choosing to do this because it's...
Right.
I mean, that's another thing that I think about a lot, is where do you draw the line between personal accountability and choice, and then being compassionate for other people's situations, and knowing that they come from a different set of circumstances? Like, how much agency do you believe people have?
Well, I think some people come into this world with a pretty hard set of circumstances that they have to overcome. I found it to be true, though, and this is not just limited to music, but just life in general. People that are born into hard circumstances and really have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and are some of the most remarkable, wonderful people that I've ever met. And often people that have everything handed to them, that are born into wealth and a sense of entitlement, often go terribly astray and become lost. And I was raised from the bootstrap point of view. I came from a very working class family, actually, that just believed in hard work. And so I took that and applied it to music because I loved music. And I think that's why maybe I prevailed in some situations when others didn't, both just in life, but also in music as an art form. But I also think that some people kind of have a propensity for the dark side. And so they'll kind of be drawn to that. And if they're not careful, it'll pull them in. And I've seen that happen too.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is central to, say, the political debate that is happening. I don't want to simplify it too much, but there's one group of people that believes that everyone should just pull themselves up from their bootstraps, no matter how dire the circumstances. And in fact, if the circumstances are more dire, then that those people will be more incentivized to pull themselves out of it.
Right. Well, yeah, I know what you mean. I would just call that sort of reductive capitalism. It's like very, it's very simple-minded. Like even though I'm a kind of a make your life the way you want it to be, you have to do that. Nobody's going to do it for you. I'm definitely not what I would call a conservative person. I'm a very progressive person because I've seen the world and I've seen how it really is.
So much blood, I'm starting to drown. Runs from cold to colder. Time to time, the skies come down. Help me lose my way. Tears of lies for answers. Just you and an open
we're living in a very different time right now where capitalism and extremist politics are dividing people. And so my message on that is to not let those people or those messengers divide you from anyone, you know? I mean, in my family, we have both conservative and progressive people, you know? And I think, you know, it's good for me to grow up with that because I could hear both sides of that debate. It was also very different back then, you know? We didn't have, you know, like open talk of Nazism and white supremacy. What's happening in our country right now is so manipulated by the media on both sides. You know, both sides are creating this divide between people. And you really have to just completely go beyond that.
It's interesting that we think of it as being two-sided rather than like 100-sided or something.
Right, exactly. You know? Or the fact, or it's one-sided in the fact that we all live in this country together in different parts and different geographic locations, and depending on the geographic location, there are different political views and different religious views, but it is a single nation. And what we should be doing is taking care of each other and not being divided and conquered and manipulated by these higher, and I don't mean higher as in like they're above us, but they're higher in a manipulative sense. So large corporations, large religious institutions, and the political institutions are all manipulating us and basically just trying to get our money and our votes. And that is not how you run a country properly. That I know for sure. But I think what happens when you start traveling and you start seeing what's going on in other countries, it gives you a very different perspective on the United States. Because you see, like for example, my wife and I are going to South America next month, and we'll be in Peru and Brazil, and we're going back to the Amazon. And when you go to so-called developing countries, you'll find that things are very different in the way people treat each other. You know, there's often more kindness and compassion and general love for the well-being of the people. And when you get to the United States and even places in Europe and other Western countries that are ruled by capitalism, you see how people they change their values to be based on money and material possessions. And when you pursue those things, your culture actually is decimated.
Do you believe that Indigenous people are happier than people in the United States in general?
Well, I don't know if they're happier, but they're inherently wiser. You know, they're wiser, and because they're more connected to the landscape and to the natural resources and to ancient traditions. And the United States is on the verge of simply becoming consumers of just stuff. That's not culture.
We're not on the verge of it, right?
I guess we're deep. We're deep in it. But that you know, consuming and buying things is not culture. That just means you're a hungry ghost that is never satisfied. So it's kind of the antithesis of culture or spiritual understanding. And really you're just being used as a financial pawn by those larger entities that want to sell you something. So
yeah, I think I'm going to journey to indigenous lands after I buy my BMW.
Yes. Are you going to buy a Perry Dakar Enduro and just like, that's what you should do. Man, I always had the dream of doing that myself because I used to ride motorcycles growing up. And I've ridden as far as New Mexico from Seattle. But
wow.
I've never done the full like transcontinental.
You never did the whole Neil Peart thing.
But I love what he does.
Earlier you mentioned that adversity breeds compassion and wisdom. And what can you think of a particularly difficult event or time in your life that shaped you into the person that you are now?
I would say, yeah, the late 1990s were very transformative for me. Several of my friends passed away, some from drug overdoses and a couple from, died of cancer. And I was still young. I was 30, 32 or 33. As a man, that's sort of like, your early to mid 30s are kind of like the prime, you're in your prime health. You're sort of at the peak of your abilities, and you start to see people, actually die and go into the earth. And I began to realize that I wanted to live a very different life. And I wasn't living a destructive lifestyle myself, but I began to realize that I didn't want to be just a rock drummer playing in a rock band or even a studio musician. I really wanted to take all that I had learned from music up to that point and transform it into a spiritual expression, which is inherently what it is for me.
Yeah.
And so, by, I would say 2002, 2003, I was in a pretty deep transformation because I'd been doing my Zen practice. I had started to go back to school and I had done a lot of traveling at that point, but I was becoming much more spiritual about what music is. And that's when I started doing solo records. And even though I continued to play in bands and still, produce people and do session work, I started to radically change my musical, like where I wanted to focus my energy. So
earlier you compared a capitalist life to getting on a train without knowing where it's headed. Yeah. And you said that your Zen practice enabled you to have more agency as far as the direction that your life is headed in.
Right.
So where do you want your life to head now?
Well, at this point, like for example, I have a small record label called Sunyata Records. Sunyata is a Sanskrit word that means all potentiality, all possibilities. That's an ancient word. And it's a sustainable label that earns enough money to sustain itself without debt.
Which is a major accomplishment in this paradigm.
Yeah. I refined it over the decade.
Is there a debate as to whether or not to even produce physical product?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, it's going to go by the wayside anyway because people are streaming and downloading. And I mean, that's been going on for years. So we make fairly minimal product compared to the digital realm. Right. And I embrace the digital world. I actually think that, there's like amazing things that are coming from that. But I do think that, it's the same kind of thing. We're musicians and small record labels are still being victimized by the major labels and, these streaming platforms that pay, fractions of a penny. You can't make a living on that. And so you have to figure out other ways to, grow your music and grow your particular brand, whatever that is. So people have to spend more time on the road. But the other side of it is there's sort of this direct, band artist directly to, the fan or the supporter. And that's different than it used to be. There's no longer a record label barrier like there was, prior to this.
Yeah, I often think about how relatively short the paradigm that we were raised in was. I mean, the records being a work of art or records being considered the definitive example of a song or an artist. People didn't really start buying records until 100 years ago or even less than that. really the 1930s is the beginning of the record industry. Yeah.
And it was blues.
Yeah. And it was blues, and it was, 78 at first?
Yeah.
And those musicians were getting taken advantage of.
Oh, yeah.
And then, it started off kind of being like a singles market, and then we've kind of looped back around to that as well.
Right.
And there's this brief period where records sold a lot and artists actually benefited from it.
Yeah. Basically 1970s to
the 90s.
Yeah, late, like they say 2000 was peak year, so maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, in our lifetime.
Yeah. It's just like a sliver of the existence of music, right? And now we're kind of just going back to this unmediated thing that it always was,
Yeah.
right?
Well, when music was first mass produced, on discs, it was more like an advertising tool to get people to come to the live show.
Right.
And then
Now it's kind of that again.
And now it's come back to that. So it's kind of come full circle. What hasn't changed is the middleman of the record label, or now that's being replaced by the Spotifys and the Apple Music and Tidal and these large corporations that, basically, Spotify is a good example because it's a great example of technology in general. Amazon, Spotify, Uber, for example. None of those companies actually produce a product. They sell other people's product. Mm-hmm. I guess Amazon has a small exception in that now they produce films and TV shows. Yeah. But Amazon essentially sells other people's products. Uber doesn't own any cars. They sell other people's driving their cars. Spotify just sells other people's music. Why are they making all the money instead of the people providing the content? Those are sort of like the prime questions. I happen to be a musician, but this is stuff that every human being needs to ask. Why is it that your product or service or labor is so devalued that some middle company, whether it's a tech company or what, is taking the profit?
Well, I think musicians are particularly easy to take advantage of because of the level of humility you need to become great.
That's true.
And I think lots of musicians don't value their work as much as perhaps they should.
Well, here's the vicious feedback cycle of that. If you're a musician in a capitalist society, the great problem is that your self-value is based upon how much you earn. Yeah. And if you don't earn a lot, then you start to think that you must not be valuable, but that's not true. Incredibly great musicians and songwriters exist, and they're not getting paid, but that doesn't mean they're not great artists. It just means they're being exploited by an inherently exploitive system. So, the other part about being an artist is learning how to be empowered and to not allow yourself to be taken advantage of.
Yes.
So maybe that is something that our society needs to learn.
I find it interesting that now we have the tools to distribute our own music directly to the people that might want to hear it, yet still the Spotifys and the Apple Musics have the reign.
Right.
It's interesting.
Capitalism might be going way off the rails right now at a global level in the same way that technology is. Technology can be great. Technology took us to the moon and could take us beyond that. But instead, we waste technology on, things like Facebook, which now, as we know, is a totally untrustworthy entity. Mm-hmm. I mean...
Are you on Facebook?
I am, but I don't put any of my personal, private information on there. I just have a...
Yeah, but they still know. They can still read everything that you're browsing.
Right.
If you're in the same browser.
Well, I never really use Facebook. I just use it as a public page to advertise, projects and shows and things like that. But I also understand that most people following me have private pages. But my point being is that if you waste your time on Facebook and you're foolish enough to put your phone number or use their email, that's a foolish decision to do that.
I love Gmail, like the interface and the power of it, but it's super fucked up that they have like all this private information about me.
So Google has all that information. But so my larger point is, don't trust technology, especially we're wasting technology on things like social media instead of things that could actually be benefiting.
Social media could be great, right?
It could be, yeah.
So why is it that that's where it wound up? I mean, what is stopping people that have less nefarious intentions from executing and making something great?
I don't know.
Or are we just a fucked up species?
Well, I think it's the business model. If you take something like social media and capitalize it so that you're making billions of dollars selling people's personal information, then you're going to get predatory reptilian corporate officers. Like it will attract those kinds of people.
One thing that's interesting is that Wikipedia is still a nonprofit, and that's right up there in the top 5, along with Facebook and Google, as far as the most accessed sites on the internet.
Right.
So I guess
Wikipedia is great. I mean, you don't use it for an academic resource, but if you need to just find out a quick little thing, it's great for that.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more reliable, I think, as far as like editorial oversight.
Yes.
And it's not an academic journal. It's not up to, it's not held to the same rigorous standards as an academic journal or something that's peer reviewed.
Right.
Well, I guess it is peer reviewed.
Somewhat, because the people that monitor the pages are...
Yeah. It's probably the closest resource that we have to this utopian like world library. I mean, it has so much information, which is cool.
Oh, well, it's like when I was in junior high and high school and we had Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
That's what if you just needed a quick reference, that's what you use.
Yeah. Well, anyway, is there anything else that we needed to discuss? Or we didn't really talk about your time in the rock bands all that much, but I feel like that's been covered.
It's not that interesting, to be honest with you. One of the things I would say about, at this point in my career, I'm turning 51 in a few days, and as I said, I'm not playing in any rock bands right now and have no plans to join a rock band. I'm just doing the Barrett Martin group, making these, kind of experimental jazz rock world music records, but a lot of really cool musicians have approached me to play with the band and be on these records. So I'm just saying yes to that, and just kind of seeing where, like, my whole life experience with music, where that's going to take me. And there's something very liberating in that, because I'm on my own label, and I have great distribution, but I don't have to really answer to anyone but myself. So everything I do is self-created and self-produced. And
what is self?
What is self? I know it's just a particle. But there's something very liberating in that. Like, it's unknown. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't have any fear about it. It's just more like, well, this is the window that I've opened, or a door that I'm going to walk through, and we'll just see where it goes.
Well, Barrett Martin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, sir. It was a great honor to be here.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.